Hi, my name is Mweni Wambua and I'm your favorite grief educator. Welcome to the Grief Cafe where we gather, grieve and grow together. Why do we do so? Because when people grieve, they want to be seen and they want to be heard. They don't need to be fixed. And so we just come to have conversations, fireside chats about the things that we grieve over, how to navigate the grief journey, and we unpack all matters grief. Remember that we defined grief as the natural and normal response to loss. Grief is also an end of a life pattern as we have known it. Grief is therefore deeply personal, and it is actually multifaceted, and it is influenced by all sorts of factors. And these factors can actually determine the intensity, the duration, and the expression of our grief. And this actually influences how we cope and how we heal. So, when we go through grief, what are some of the factors that influence how we grieve? Number one, loved ones. Now, when we think about it, we have a relationship with that is defined by the nature of our relationship with the person, the type of the bond, the role the disease played in our lives, and any unresolved conflict that we may have had with the deceased. For instance, if you lose a parent, what kind of a bond did you have with this parent? If you lose a boss, remember that in grief, we do not grieve over titles. We grieve over the kind of relationship that you had. So what was the kind of bond that you had? Did you have conflict in that relationship? Was it a relationship that was affirming? Was it a relationship that actually gave you identity? There are certain relationships that we call identity pillars. A parent, a spouse, they're relationships that when those relationships come to an end, we feel like our identity has been fragmented. So the nature of our relationship is a factor on how we grieve. The closeness, how close were you with the person? They may not have had a title per se. They may not have been an auntie, a sister, a cousin, an uncle, a brother, a father, or a mother, but how close were you? Number three, the nature of the relationship. Was there a conflict in that relationship? Was it a professional relationship? Was it a relationship where this person was a confidant, this person was an advisor, this person was a mentor, this person was someone you looked up to, this person was an authority figure? Because if they were any of those things, then you may feel a bit destabilized, you may feel a bit lost, you may feel a bit overwhelmed, you may be left feeling a bit confused because how do I pick up? How am I able to resume life without the presence of this person in my life? There are other people that play a pivotal role in our lives. They play a financial support. They are an emotional support. Think about it. If you lose the breadwinner in your family, even though you're already grieving the loss of that person, you will find yourself wondering, what does that mean? Am I still going to be able to go to school? Am I going to have to drop out of school? Oh my goodness, is rent going to be paid? And so because of the nature of because of the nature of the relationship that you had with that person, because of the role that that person played in my life, it will affect how I grieve. Number two, on the factors that influence grief is life roles. Remember that this one, sometimes you'll find it depends on when the loss happened, in terms of the age of the person who has lost their loved one and the developmental stage they're in. For instance, children do not have a capacity to really comprehend the permanence of loss. Children may think this person will come back. They may not fully understand what loss looks like. They may not fully comprehend that death is the end of your ever physically interacting with that person. And so they may seem to be easily getting over the grief, but that's because they have not quite absorbed what the loss looks like. teenagers. Remember that adolescents are in a stage of where there's so many things going on emotionally with them, and therefore another loss causes greater confusion into an already intense life situation. Adolescence is marked by a lot of questions. Adolescence is marked by a search for identity. Adolescence is marked by a search for understanding who am I and answering that question. And in the midst of all those questions, when you have a loss, especially of a pivotal relationship, that can have a big bearing on how the person begins to see themselves anymore. Remember, adolescents are also very likely to want to associate with their peers, to want to be seen as hanging out together with their peers, and their peers are a big part of their life. They're an influential part of their life. And so now, what is this loss going to mean in terms of who their peers think of them as being? For instance, if I am a teenager and my father loses a job or my mother loses her job and we have to move out of that neighborhood, this teenager may actually end up finding themselves in a level of an identity crisis, because I have always considered myself to have been in a certain neighborhood. I have always considered myself to have been in a certain social status and therefore only associated with people in that level. And now, because that has been shaken, who am I? Yeah, adults may feel the compounding of responsibilities. If you're a mother and you lose your spouse, now you're faced with the responsibility of parenting alone. If you're a man and you lose your wife, you're now faced with the responsibility of wondering about the nitty-gritties of running a home that possibly it's your wife that was taking care of those responsibilities before. If you're an adult and you lose a parent, you will find yourself that you're at a place where you thought, now I began working, now my life is a bit more settled. I was looking forward to being able to cater to my mom, and now my mom has passed on. She will never experience the fruit of her labor, the money, that the investment she poured in me and taking me to school. And my mother, my father will never experience that because they have since passed on. So an adult may be left with feelings of guilt, with feelings of regret. I wish I'd gotten a job earlier. I wish I could have done a bit more. And so that also leaves them with a level of with a greater level of feeling the loss. Older adults, I am sure many of us have experienced this, where a child in a home dies, maybe a 5-year-old child, and you will have the grandfather or grandmother saying, "Oh my goodness, I wish that child had not died. I wish it was me who had died." Because remember, older adults have carried and have experienced and have felt a lot of losses over the years. So anytime a loss happens, it stirs up those feelings of loss. It reminds them of the very things that they have lost over the course of their life and makes them feel sorry for themselves sometimes. It makes them feel forsaken. It makes them feel a sense of being overwhelmed. It may leave them with a sense of questioning life. And so older adults do not quite get experienced on how to grieve. Instead, they are left with a sense of feeling that they could have done, should have done differently, whatever that means. Now, the type of loss is also a one that affects us in this place. Remember that there are some losses that are a bit more, that are tangible, and then there are other losses that are not tangible. So when you go through life and you lose your health, and you're losing your health at a stage where your family is young, you start feeling and wondering, do I take care of my medical bills, or do I decide to not have my medical bills covered, so that money that would be covering my medical bills goes towards the education of the children, because I don't know whether I will make it. And so those are some of the conversations that adults have with themselves when they get sick or when they are diagnosed with something in their older and they have young children, or when they lose their jobs, they sometimes will find that they do not have time to actually sit down and absorb what they are feeling. Instead, they feel an obligation to quickly get over and pick themselves up because life has to go on. And so they do not take time to pause and reflect on their loss, but they simply pick up and decide, you know what, I have to deal. There are other losses that we call intangible. Now, intangible losses could, for instance, be you're an adult and now you've raised your children and now they've gone away from the home. They've all gone to university, or your youngest has gone to college, or they have relocated and they have moved out of the home, and now you're left home by yourself. And now you're left wondering, I have a 4-bedroom house and it's just me and my spouse. What am I going to do about that? Or you're a mother and you realize that all my evenings were about going home, cooking for the children, and now there's no one to go home and cook for. And now my life has lost meaning. I don't know what to do with my time anymore. I have all these hours. There's so much silence around me. Oh my goodness, who would have thought that I would miss the noise? Who would have thought that I would miss complaining how bread is getting finished every time? Because now here I am and I'm wishing there was someone to eat the bread in the house. And sometimes it sounds funny, but sometimes because you're so used to cooking for 4 teenagers, you don't know how to cook small meals anymore. And so you find that now your roles in life are changing, and that influences how you feel. Sometimes it makes us feel, am I actually still relevant in this life? Because all the people and all the things that gave me relevance and all the things that made me feel like my life had meaning have since changed. Another thing that influences how we grieve is lifestyle. Now, this refers to our physical and our mental health. If we have mental health issues, like if you're living with depression, if you're living with PTSD, if you're living with complicated grief, and then a new loss happens, that your capacity to navigate that new loss may be compromised because your mental health is already not at optimal level. And therefore you may find that that person who's already living with a certain mental health challenge may need greater support because of this new loss. Another thing is our physical health. Stress does impact how we grieve, and stress does impact our physical well-being. So if I have let's say I have diabetes and I go through a loss, you may find that my sugar may then fluctuate up and down. Or I am living with high blood pressure and now I go through a loss, you may find that my blood pressure is off the charts. Or if I am living with asthma, you may find that I've been okay and I've not had any asthmatic attack, but now with this new loss, it may make my physical challenges even greater. You may find that there may be a sense of prolonged grief because I have to be admitted in hospital, I have to be monitored, I have to keep checking my vitals because everything has been thrown off balance. Another factor that influences how we grieve is livelihood. Have we lost your livelihood? Do you have access to resources? Now remember that financial stability is a big factor when it comes to our losses. Economic stress following a loss is a big factor. Did you lose your job? What does that mean? I'm no longer able to afford the necessities of life. And even where I am, I still have some money saved aside or some access to some money. I'm going to be a bit more careful how I spend it because who knows what tomorrow looks like? Who knows when I'll get a job again? Who knows when I'll be able to replenish the savings that I'm going to touch to sustain my life? if I used to run a business and my business has now shut down, or my business got burnt down, what does that mean? How am I going to feed the family? How am I going to take care of the family? Or I used to be a matatu driver and I've had an accident and now I have been left paralyzed. All I have known my life is how to drive a matatu. How am I going to cope without my feet? How am I going to cope when my own capacity to move has been compromised? How am I supposed to help people move? And so again, because my livelihood has been affected, it will be a factor on how I grieve. Another factor, a fifth factor that influences how we grieve is our location and the community around us. Do we have a social support system around us? Have we had past experiences with loss? Have we relocated? Has there been an estrangement in our family structure? Or is there a collective grief from community? For instance, when we have a social support system that is together, if you belong to a church and you go through a loss, this community of faith comes together. This community of faith reorganizes itself around the bereaved family. They reorganize themselves and attend to the grieved family. They organize themselves and take care of the details. Now, if you do not belong to any organized support system, you have to do these things by yourself. If you don't have any organized support system and you lose your home, you're going to be by yourself wondering, where do I go? But if you lose your home and you have people around you that are aware that you've lost your home, they're going to step in. They're going to step in and say, you know what? Your children can come to my house. You can come to my house. We can spare this. We can spare that. We can help you restart life afresh. But this can only come when you have a social support system. So I wonder, do we have social support systems? Because guess what? We probably need to invest in having a social support system before the need arises, so that on the day your need arises, you will have people that already identify with you and can support you. And also because when we belong to a social support system, we help others. We step up in supporting others in their journey. And therefore, when it is my turn, my time, others will walk with me. Some of us have a robust network of family and friends. We even include people that I was in high school with, people that I was in primary school with, my neighborhood support group, my church community, my work community, people that I worked with in even years past. You may find that we are still in touch with one another. Sometimes you may find we have a WhatsApp group that already exists. And so when it is my time to need help, I will call upon these people and they will step up. And so remember, as you have stepped up for others, they will step up for you. And these people, these groups, these support systems will provide practical support. Sometimes it may be the neighbors who decide, you know what, you've gone through a loss, I will stay with the children in the evening when the meetings are going on in your house. When you're going for the church service, I will watch over the children. I will drop the children to school so that you can get a few more hours of sleep in the morning. I will watch over your house when you travel up country for the funeral. You know, and these things are practical help that we need. Sometimes it may just be emotional support. My house is very lonely because now the person that I used to chat with at night is no longer there. And so this neighborhood, this support group can decide, we'll check on you, we'll come and visit you, not for anything specific, but just so that you're not spending the evenings by yourself. And that helps. Unfortunately, what happens with grief is that grief naturally makes us want to withdraw. It makes us want to isolate from family and from people. Now, when we lack a social support system, and when we are not surrounded by people, or when we are surrounded by people who don't understand what we are going through, and people who do not validate our grief, that can slow down our healing process. And so isolation is not something that should be, is not something that a person going through grief needs to experience. You can decide to not be with people, but to be isolated when you actually want to be with people can actually make the grief seem even harder. Community support. When think of situations where a natural disaster happens, and then we have collective mourning. Think about things like we've had, like fires in certain communities. Recently in Nyeri, we had a school that burned down, and the community stepped up. The community stepped up to pick the children. The community stepped up to support the children. The community stepped up and had services in that school, and the community really stepped up. And so the school was not grieving in isolation, but they were grieving as one. They were coming together and they were offering each other support. They were offering each other moral support. They were offering each other emotional support, and they were even offering each other practical support. Can we help you can we help you clear the debris from the fire? Can we help you do this, that, or the other? Also, our previous experience with loss has an influence on how we grieve. When you have gone through previous losses and you have been supported and you navigated those losses well, when you go through this loss again, you will be able to pick up from the lessons in that loss and navigate better. If your previous experiences with loss were not well navigated, you will struggle. Because you did not navigate it well then, you will not be able to navigate it well now. Finally, what are our longings and what are our beliefs about the loss that we have gone through? Sometimes when we go through losses, now this is the place that we talk about what are our cultural beliefs. This is the place we talk about what are our spiritual beliefs. This is the place of asking what's our worldview, what's our personality, what's our perspective, what are the circumstances under which the loss has happened. Remember that grief can trigger an existential crisis, and this will challenge one's spiritual beliefs. This will challenge you and will find you wondering, is this all there is to life? Has life lost meaning? And we have unfulfilled dreams, expectations, ambitions, desires, and when these are not met, it can evoke a deep longing and questions about the purpose of life. Circumstances of the loss. If you lose your home because someone did not do what they needed to do, because someone underestimated the quantities needed when you are building, or you lose your home because there has been a malicious court case, or there's been a malicious incident that made you lose it, or you lose your loved one in a murder. You lose your loved one and they died by suicide. These are things that will influence how we grieve. You lose your loved one. We have a loss that we call the ambiguous loss. They didn't die. They just woke up one day and left. We don't know where they are. We don't know whether they are alive. We don't know where they have died. We don't know if they are suffering. We don't know if they began a new family. We just don't know. The circumstances of that loss can make our grieving journey very, very complicated. The age of the deceased. Do you notice that oftentimes when we lose someone who has lived to be at an advanced age, there's a sort of celebration? Now, that's not to say you're not grieving, but when you look at someone who died and they were 99, and they were in their 90s, they were in their 80s, we look at them and we say, you know what? They lived a full life. But when you lose someone who's at the prime of their life, I find that when you lose someone who's in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, a teenager, a child, there's a lot of weight in it. Indeed, it is said the heaviest coffins are the smallest ones, because in the loss of a child, there's almost a sense of loss of the future, because this child embodied dreams, this child embodied the future, they embodied ambitions, they embodied the aspirations of the family, and now they are gone. So the age of the deceased is a factor in how we grieve. And then we have our individual personality and our coping style. There are people who somehow seem to navigate through life better than others. They seem to navigate through life with a sense of confidence that, you know what, tomorrow will be a better day. We live to fight again. There is new hope for tomorrow. And they navigate life from almost a sense of hopefulness and confidence and reassurance. And then there are other people that everyday experiences of life have a way of really weighing them down, really leaving them lost, really leaving them overwhelmed, and they just sort of seem to get stuck there, and they seem to dwell and ponder so much in that space, and anything and everything that's going on in their life, they read in between the lines way more than the first category of people. And so our personality does influence how we cope. Our emotional resilience is what this looks like. I mean, do we have the capacity to bounce back? There are people who will lose a business and will bounce back and will start another one. And then there are other people who will lose a business and they're never trying again. Then we have people who have different kinds of what we call attachment style. If you had very secure attachment style, you may find that you grieve differently from people who have anxious or avoidant attachment style. If you have a secure attachment style, you may find that you're more likely to express your grief fully. But if you have an insecure or anxious or avoidant attachment style, you may find that you don't want to really dwell in there with the emotions. You actually don't want to allow yourself to even feel them. Finally, what are our cultural beliefs? What does our culture say about loss? What are the ceremonies around loss that we have? What are the rituals we have around grief? How do we carry out the mourning practices? What are our spiritual beliefs about death? What do we believe that happens when we die? What are the questions we have about life beyond death? Now, all these things work together and come together to influence how we grieve. So let us recap these things again. Number one, loved ones. What is the nature of the relationship and what is their role in our lives? Number two, their life roles. This is related to the development and the age of the person who is grieving. Number three, lifestyle. What's our physical health? What's our mental health? Livelihood. Number four, do we have access to resources? Do we have access to therapeutic help? Has our financial stability been shaken by this loss? Number five, location and community. What are the support systems we have around us? And number six, longings and beliefs. What are the spiritual, cultural beliefs that we uphold? What is our personality? What is our interpretation of the loss? And what are the circumstances under which the loss has happened? That's our show today, and I hope that you will be able to catch a glimpse of where you are in your grief journey. Tuendelee kuongea.